for your kind introduction. Thank you, Noel. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Andrew Plume. I'm a Senior Director of Research Evaluation. We're a team within Mohammed Asati's Funding and Content Analytics Group. I am based out of the Oxford office, but I'm joining you today, as you can see, from my home. And I'm also responsible for an initiative that we call ICSR. That's the International Centre for the Study of Research, whose mission is to make the evaluation of research better by making it more evidence-based. And here I think we have a case study in that. So today I'm delighted to introduce to you Ambrose Yim, who is a DPhil candidate in the Maths Department at Oxford University. Ambrose's DPhil is supported through an EPSRC-funded Centre for Doctoral Training on Industrially Focused Mathematical Modelling, so we just call that InFoMM, where each DPhil candidate works with an internal maths supervisor, but also with a partner company. And in Ambrose's case, I currently represent that corporate partner. So all the students at InFoMM spend a year doing broadening courses, soft skills, business awareness, and 2 10-week industrial projects before they start the 3-year doctoral research project. In Ambrose's case, those 2 industrial projects were with BT, developing models of internal business organization, and his second was with Emirates Group in the area of persistent homology and computational topology. In the Emirates work, Ambrose applied methods of topological data analysis, or TDA, to describe airline passenger co-flight social networks. And he was looking for holes in those social networks, which can potentially be filled, perhaps by offering a discount on a group booking, for example. So Ambrose's DPhil continues this focus on methods and applies them to our challenges and our data sets here at Elsevier. And he started work with us in early 2019. So we're around halfway through. The keen-eyed amongst you may recognize Ambrose from his previous smash hit seminar in this series entitled Topological Data Analysis, The Shape of Data, back in October of last year, 2019. But today, Ambrose is going to share his latest work on measuring diversity in journals. So as we already heard from Noel, please hold your questions, either enter your thoughts in the chat box as we go through, or go ahead and unmute yourself at the end of Ambrose's presentation and speak your mind. But now, Ambrose, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andrew. You seem to know me better than I know myself. So that was a very thorough introduction. And as Andrew was saying, I have been working with Andrew and previously Kate Gasson for approximately 1.5, 2 years-ish. And InFoMM really works with a lot of companies, and they include people like Tesco, people like Schlumberger, who work in the oil industry, and sort of a wide variety of people. So I get to talk to other students who work with industrial partners, and I get to sort of absorb a lot of what they do and what they think, and sort of general awareness of what other people in industry are applying mathematics to their daily work. And so on the academic side, I have 2 supervisors. I have Vinananda, who's a topologist, and Professor Peter Grindrod, who is a person who's spent a lot of time working with industry throughout his career, and he even got a CPE because of that. And I'm part of this Data for Topological Data Analysis, which is a cross-university project between Oxford, Swansea, and Liverpool. So this is just one picture to summarize what I talked about in our last talk. So in the last talk, I talked about how if we're given some distance measure between articles in a journal, and I want to look at how, as I add articles to a journal, how that body of articles grow in time. And I try and I want to extract trends, and these trends aren't sort of singular strands that just evolve independently. They kind of come together and split, and they fork off, and they kind of they do all sorts of interesting dynamics. And what I'd previously done and described was a way of trying to take this bunch of articles filtered in time and get a combinatorial graph out of it. So it's illustrated in this picture. You could imagine the x-axis being some kind of a topic dimension of this point cloud, and the y-axis being the time dimension. And I'm adding articles over time. And I really want to capture the fact that two trends kind of merge together, and then there's this weird loop forming, this split and recombination happening, and they come back together and then they split again. So there's this algorithm called the map algorithm, which allows us to take this data and output the graph on the right-hand side, which combinatorially captures what happens. And that kind of gives a rich description of how research trends really work. But on to what I want to talk about today. So when was it? It was 2 months BC. That's 2 months before Corona. And I think it was in January, I went to this talk by a mathematician called Emily Roth, and she talked about this concept called magnitude and a related concept called diversity. And this is really about measuring the size. And for most of this talk, I'll be reviewing kind of the theory behind this, and this is a very deep mathematical theory with many connections to different fields in pure mathematics, but actually it has a very sort of applied mathematics motivation as well, and we could really apply this mathematics to really understand the questions that we might be interested in. So here's some key references if you want to go and look at that topic yourself. But the problem we're trying to solve is, if we have n articles in a journal, which we say is a set A, labeled 1 to n, and we just want to count the size and naively just say that there are n articles and that's it, so be it. But actually, if 2 articles are similar, then we shouldn't really count them as 2 articles. For example, if you have 2 duplicate entries, then really that should be 1 article rather than 2. And then this sort of, things not as black and white, and between being exactly the same and exactly distinct, there's this scale. And you want to say, things that are somewhat similar to each other isn't fully, 2 things that are similar to each other isn't fully 2 articles, but somewhere between 1 and 2. So is there a systematic way of counting that? And we assume we're given a measure of similarity between objects, between these articles. And let's say we normalize the data so that each article is 1, similarity 1 to itself, so it can only be maximally 1. And for articles that are dissimilar, are distinct, they're dissimilar, and their similarity is between 0 and 1. And we have this symmetric relation, which means that each article views the article as similar as the other article views the other, which is this Zij equals Zji. So the indices II here refer to the article index. And we want this effective size to look somewhat like an inverse of similarity, because the more similar the objects, kind of the smaller the effective size of the system. But I mean, there's a lot of finesse in trying to actually pin down that idea. So we construct this recipe. So given a set of articles and similarity Z, I want to assign a set of weights. So article I would have a weight omega I, and we just simply sum up the omegas to get the effective size of the whole data set. And to really tackle that problem, we sort of have to introduce a proxy concept called typicality. So if we weigh the articles in some way and give them weights omega 1 to omega n, and we define the typicality of the ith article as this sum. So what is really happening in this sum is, I take article I, and then I look at the other articles it's similar to, and I multiply the similarity by the weight on that article. So this omega j is the weight on another article j, and this zij is the similarity between I and j. And we take this weighted sum of weights. So this measures the concentration of weights around article I. So if you imagine if you assign them uniform weights, then an article that has that is very similar to other articles would have a high typicality, and an article which is in general dissimilar to other articles would have a low typicality. So this actually is a way for us to define how sort of the magnitude of a data set, or sort of the size of this data set. So the kind of ethos is, we don't want a uniform weight, but we want a uniform typicality. And so we want a set of weights such that the typicalities are uniform. And we sort of solve that system of equations, and we obtain a weight, and with sum of weights gets the overall magnitude of our set of articles. And if this matrix Z is so-called invertible matrix, then this magnitude is actually equal to the inverse of Z as a matrix, and we sum up all the entries of this matrix. So this again goes back to the concept that we want this size to be somewhat like an inverse of similarity, where the more similar articles are to each other, the smaller the effective size. And another point is, if this matrix is invertible with this mathematical property called invertibility, then that means that we could have a unique weighting obtained. And if not, if this matrix is not invertible, then there may be multiple ways of assigning weights such that we get a uniform typicality for all articles. However, as it turns out, there may be multiple ways of assigning weights, but the sum is actually invariant. And this is an interesting mathematical property, and this is what leads to many people in various areas of mathematics, like geometry, and people who study graphs, people who study category theory, to study this object. And there's some geometric connections, such as if you could sort of play around with this object and you actually recover stuff such as curvature and surface areas and Euler magnitudes and interesting geometric objects. For a set of articles, these concepts of surface area are not defined, so we sort of set those aside and just focus on discussing just how to measure size. So just to recap for a bit, this magnitude, this assignment of weights, is an assignment such that the typicality is uniform. A question is, do we actually get positive weights? Because it's easy to interpret positive weights. What does it mean to negatively weigh an article? That is slightly more difficult to understand from an applications point of view. And we say this, we could compute this. I mean, can we actually compute this in all scenarios? Can I have a system where objects are dissimilar to each other in a certain way that this magnitude is actually undefined? And so this is not a problem-free concept. Sometimes you get negative weights, sometimes this magnitude doesn't exist, but we'll talk about how to fix these later on. And here's an example. So let's imagine we have 2 points, 2 articles, and we have some distance d apart. And we say if they're distance d, then we say the similarity is we take the exponential to the minus d, which sends the distance to number between 1 and 0. And moreover, as the distance increases, the similarity decreases. And we can compute the magnitude, and we can see on the right-hand side, this graph, so the y-axis is the magnitude of these 2 points, and the x-axis is the distance. And when the distance is 0, the magnitude is 1. And when the distance gets larger and larger, actually the magnitude is 2, which kind of confirms intuition that this is counting the number of points. As 2 points get further apart, they become more and more distinct. As 2 points come closer, they become less distinct. Let me just zoom out. Let's take a slightly less trivial example. So let's take this 3 points, and they're arranged in the way at the bottom. So this is an isosceles triangle. 2 sides are length 100 times t, and 1 side is length t. So as we reduce this t number to closer and closer to 0, these points become more bunched together. So that effectively they would have size 1. And as we sort of move, so if we increase t and we get to an intermediary scale, so we've got 1 point very far apart from the 2 points to the left, two points on the right. And one might think that if we squint, we would see 2 points rather than 3 points. But as we sort of increase this t even further and further, even the 2 points on the right become so far apart that we must regard them as distinct points, and we get 3 points. And we see that in the magnitude. So the blue line is the overall magnitude, and the t is the x-axis. So as we increase t from 0, so at near 0 it's 1, it's counting 1 point where all points are very close to each other, and we increase t, and at some scale we get a magnitude of around 2. So that's the scale at which we left-hand side point is very far away, but on that scale, the right-hand side points are still very close together. We see 2 points effectively. And as we increase t, we finally see 3 points. Now, the orange curve is the weight we assign to the left-hand side point. And as we increase t to the intermediary scale, we see that it has effectively a weight of 1. So this weight is kind of a measure of how isolated these points are. As we sort of take this point on the left so far away, then it's very isolated from other points. But however, the green curve, which is describes the weight we assign to the pair of points on the right, at the same scale, it is not quite weight 1. They're not quite isolated. So they have a weight of around 1/2. But as we sort of zoom out further and further, then those 2 points become so distinct that we get a weight of 1, which means they're effectively isolated. So hopefully these examples give you some intuition of why this magnitude thing makes sense as a measure of how big something is or how isolated something is. But as I've mentioned, that there are certain issues with using magnitude as an effective size. This seems to malfunction. Do you mind if I reboot this and pause for a sec? There seems to be an issue with my slides.
Yeah, of course, that's fine.
And in the meantime, if you have any questions about things I've discussed so far, then feel free to ask them now. Let's see.
I'm glad you got them back there, Ambrose, because
Exactly.
I didn't want to have to start humming the wait music. Nobody really needs to hear how bad my my ear is.
Right. So we great.
I think
yeah. Right. So kind of yeah. This is a 3-point example. It's kind of the example. So it's good to have in mind. And And as I was saying, there are certain issues with using magnitude as an effective size proxy. For example, the weight we assign to each point is negative, which makes it hard to interpret. And since the weights are negative, the overall magnitude can be negative, or even, and sometimes it can even be undefined. It could blow up, it could be infinite. And this doesn't really make sense. What does it mean to have negative size? And paradoxically, sometimes in certain cases, decreasing the similarities can sometimes lead to a decrease in magnitude. So why is that non-intuitive? So if we decrease similarities, things are further apart, so we expect the effective size of the system to be bigger. But however, that is not always the case. And sometimes, if you compute a magnitude on a subset, you subselect some bits of A and you compute a magnitude of that. That can have an even magnitude than the entirety of A itself. Again, you shouldn't expect something smaller to have a bigger size than something that is bigger. So it's like the TARDIS. That doesn't happen in real life. So these sort of pathological problems appear when we move away from sort of slightly well-behaved systems and real-world data, such as looking at similarities of articles. That might very well be the case. There's no guarantee that those spaces are well-behaved. So here is kind of the fix. So the root of all evil is actually the fact that we allowed weights to be negative in the first place. So we now restrict our weights to be positive or zero. And then we find the largest subset of this entire subset of articles, entire set of articles. And we scan each subset and we try and balance typicality on each subset. And if there is a subset that we can compute a balanced typicality with positive weights, we take them under consideration, and we take the largest subset where this is possible, where we can find non-negative weights that balance typicality on that subset. And we call this object maximum diversity. So it's I used the absolute sign of A as magnitude, but this maximum diversity, I say it's absolute value of A with a plus subscript. And just to compare the two, on the left-hand side we have magnitude, and right-hand side we have maximum diversity. So with magnitude, the weights can be negative, which is non-intuitive. But on the other side, in discussing maximum diversity, we're assigning weights that are always positive. And for magnitude, it is a uniform typicality everywhere. However, we only have uniform typicality imposed on a certain subset when we are talking about diversity, though that subset is as maximal as it can be. So it's the largest subset. Oops. And magnitude can be negative or undefined, but we can prove that this maximum diversity is always positive, and this number always exists. Moreover, it satisfies this sort of intuitive properties. So if we decrease similarity, we always the maximum diversity is non-decreasing. And if we compute the maximum diversity of a subset, that's always less than the maximum diversity of a set, including that initial set. So it's not a TARDIS, and maximum diversity is something that has more intuitive behavior that conforms to what we sort of imagine as a size. And if we look at the weights we actually assign to our articles, such that we achieve this maximal diversity, we actually can distinguish two sets of articles. So one set is I call the bulk, and the other set is what I call the complement of the bulk, or just the complement. It's the stuff that's not in the bulk. And so what are these two sets? So in the bulk, we always have a non-negative weight, whereas on the complement, the weight is always 0. And on the bulk, the typicality is balanced, and that typicality is minimal. However, away from the complement, the typicality is bigger than 1. So we kind of get a sense here of this, how articles in the bulk compare with articles in the complement. So things in the complement are somewhat more typical, and things in the bulk are somewhat less typical. Things actually the magnitude of the bulk is computes the maximal diversity. However, there's no contribution of any of since the weights it's assigned weight 0 on the complement, it does not contribute to the size of the system, the maximal diversity. And within bulk, we could rank the contributions to the size by looking at the weight. So if you have a large weight, then so going back to that triangle analogy, triangle picture I showed, if you have a large weight that's close to 1, then that article has an effective size of 1, and it's isolated, it's far away from other things. So we can use this weight to rank things within the bulk. And on the complement, the weight is 0, however, the typicality is not uniform. And so we can rank how typical things are in the complement by the typicality. And so here's just a formula to keep track of all this information. So on the left-hand side, it's just a column of typicalities of each article, and we separate them into two halves, so those belonging to the bulk and those belonging to the complement. And on the bulk, it's balanced and minimal, so it's 1, and on the complement, it's bigger than 1. On the right-hand side, this computes the typicality from the weights. So the new B is the weight on the bulk, and it's always bigger than 0. And on the bulk, on the complement, the weight is 0. So this is just a figure to summarize this information. So I believe this has some implications for efficient sampling. So we could regard the articles in the complement C as being so typical that the contributions can be represented using articles in the bulk. They contribute to no effective size. And and you actually prove this, that you could, for any article in the complement, or you could find an article in the bulk such that it is close to that article. And very interestingly, the similarity lower bound for that is an inverse of the size of the system. So that's one approach from a slightly sort of abstract and slightly pure mathematics point of view. We talked about assigning size to objects, and we see this of sliding scales, weights between 0 and 1, measuring how isolated points are in the context of the whole system. And and there's actually another way of looking at this problem and arrive at the same result. And this is actually motivated by a very similar problem, an almost identical problem in ecology. So if you're a person in biology, an ecologist trying to study an ecosystem, and you want to sort of quantify the effective number of species, because obviously, if I have a zebra and a horse, those two are very similar, and if you might call that almost one species, and if the ecosystem is a zebra and a horse and a lion, then you might say this is not quite three. It's not quite three species. It's more like lion is almost one species, and the horse and the zebra is combined is almost one species. So you might give them like 2 point something. To heuristically speaking, so it is almost exactly solving the same problem. So it's approaching it from a slightly different ethos. So, so we, instead of looking at weight, we look at probabilities on sort of articles, and we talk about instead a normalized typicality, where instead of a weighted sum, well, instead of the weighted sum of similarities and weights, we have weighted sum of probabilities and similarities. So this is the expected tau hat I is the expected similarity to article I if we randomly draw another article from this distribution. And we want to find a distribution such that any article randomly sampled is on average atypical. So what they do in sort of ecology is they try and maximize this diversity index. And this diversity index is the inverse of the inverse of the average typicality. So this index is maximized if the average typicality is small across the system. So, and we look at the expression on the far most right-hand side, and we realize this diversity thing is actually what it's computing is the most spread out distribution, because the thing on the right-hand side of the equation, it is effectively computing if I randomly draw 2 articles from this set, and I look at the similarity between those 2 articles. I'm basically randomizing minimizing the pairwise, the expected pairwise similarity between articles. So if I'm drawing articles from a distribution to minimize the similarity, that gives us some sense of trying to sample things such that we sample things in the most spread out way. However, I mean, this is not the only way. I mean, this expression D2P is 2 diversity index is not the only way of measuring diversity. In fact, people study a whole family of diversity indices, and these are some horrible equations. So if you put Q equals 2 in that formula, you get the expression on page before. And these all kind of carry roughly the same motivation, but you just write down slightly different equations depending on your personal preferences. And it's worth mentioning that this diversity index is actually closely related to entropy, where actually entropy is a limiting case where entropy of the distribution, where in the limiting case where no objects, no articles are similar to each other at all, so they're as maximally dissimilar, they have similarity 0 with each other, then when we compute the diversity of a distribution over maximally dissimilar objects, we're computing the entropy. And for those who have seen entropy, that is a measure of the size of information contained in the distribution in some loose sense. It is a measure of disorder. It's a measure of how spread out things are. But people usually end up in very bad places if they think too much about entropy. So I'll just don't say anything more about entropy. So we have this whole family of things, of diversity indices that we could choose to maximize, and this is really up to personal preference. But as it turns out, there is a unique probability distribution that maximizes all diversity indices across this whole family. And moreover, the maximal diversity attained is the same across all Q. So this suggests that this diversity thing is something that's really quite intrinsic to this space. It's not something that's extrinsic. This probability distribution again is something that's very intrinsic to the properties of the system. And moreover, actually, when you compute this, you actually get your what we previously defined as maximal diversity. This A plus, and you could recover the weights you could recover the distribution by taking the weights and divide it through by the A plus, and you get back to a distribution that maximizes diversity on the space. So so I hope I've convinced you that these are some mathematically interesting and actually useful objects to consider. And there's this sort of nice duality between this relation between the concept of size, and how spread out you can make things on this system. So the larger your system, the harder it is to spread things out. That is kind of also the easier it is to spread things out. That is kind of the relation between these two concepts. But let's look at some data. And we chose a journal, the International Journal of Impact Engineering, looked at articles from 2010 to 2018 inclusive. And for similarities, we just did something very stupid. In previous projects, I try using some topic modeling, but that tends to be a quite involved process, quite finicky, and quite takes a lot of fine tuning. And here, as just this demonstration, a proof of concept where you use kind of the dumbest similarity you could compute is that you look at the index keywords of the journal, and for each article, and you compute the overlap. So between how many keywords two articles share, and you divide by the total number of keywords across these two articles, and that gives you a similarity. So if the overlap between the keywords is large, then you get something close to 1. If there's no overlap, then you get something that's 0. So I think that's not a not sensible way of defining similarity, though that is a somewhat coarse way to do so. So we first compute this maximal diversity weight that is always positive on the entire data set. And we get an effective weight, well, the maximal diversity we computed was 184-ish. And so this means that effectively there are 184 distinct articles in this set of 1,271 articles. So there's a huge collapse in information. So there's articles are very correlated, and multiple articles express very similar things, at least in the sense of having similar keywords. And then we grouped the articles by year group. And then we summed over the weights for each year group. So this sum of weights new year is saying how much effective size does each year group contribute to the total effective size of the total journal. And so that is actually the red curve in the diagram on the left. So the red curve tracks the effective contribution to effective size of each year group. And the blue curve is the number of actual submissions in each year. And as you see, sort of as time goes by, we get more submissions, but they actually, each year contributes effectively very, very increasingly similar content. So the effective size of successive year groups in general tends to decrease. So that suggests something like people are starting to use more similar keywords. So measuring keyword similarity doesn't do much to distinguish. If we just measure things by keyword similarity, then increasingly articles are more similar. A second thing we did was we actually restricted to each year group and computed the weight of each article in its own year group. So we take articles in a year, strip away all the other articles in other years, and compute the weight of each article in relation to articles in the same year rather than those in other years. And it's interesting because some articles with with non-zero weight, non-zero contribution to effective size in the context of its year group, so they're in the bulk of its year group. However, when you sort of consider in the context of the, across 2010 to 2018, they end up having 0 weights. They end up being in the complement rather than in the bulk when you consider these articles in the context of the whole of articles across 2010 to 2018. And so this allows us to measure how distinctive an article can be compared to its contemporaries, but it might be ordinary when we compare it in the context of the whole collection. And we plot sort of mu I year, so the weight associated with the year group on the x-axis, and then weight when we sort of expand the collection to the whole to 2018. And we get these scatter plots, and they look almost all the same. So here's kind of how I think we can analyze it. So they all look like this. Someone's kicked a football into a pot of water, and you see this pot of water as a horizontal line, and you see the splash. You see the splash of water droplets. And what the stuff on the horizontal line represents is precisely those articles that are locally contributing to effective content when we respect to sort of the context of those contemporaries, but globally they are actually overrepresented. And the articles on this far right-hand top corner are articles that have a high global weight and have a high local weight, which means that they're globally and contemporarily distinctive. And so things towards the bottom right-hand side are articles that are contemporarily distinctive, but sort of globally more or less a bit common. We can do these for weights, for typicalities. And again, this looks like the same plot, but with the axis flipped over. These look like if you take some dandelion and blow on it, and you see the scattering of seeds. And so the blue line is again represent the local bulk that becomes the global complement. Articles are locally distinctive, but globally not. Things on top left corner are interesting objects, interesting articles that are globally typical, but in relation to the contemporaries are atypical. And articles towards the top right-hand corner are those that are globally and contemporarily typical. So I think it's just about time to summarize. So we have this duality between the size of the system and how easy we spread things out on the system. The larger it is, the easier it is to spread things out. The smaller we make a system, the more bunch of things are. So it has smaller diversity. And we could deduce kind of an intrinsic, there's something really quite intrinsic, an intrinsic property, the most spread out distribution given by this weight divided by the size of the system. And we can partition our set of articles into things in the bulk and complement, where things in the bulk are things we have positive weight, and things in the complement are things we don't even bother weighing because they are well represented by those in the bulk. And those in the bulk have minimal typicality, and those in the complement have typicality higher than those in the bulk. And the complement consists of what we consider over-represented contents, and we could identify objects in the bulk as novelties. So, I was thinking. So Andrew was asking me, can you look at this from a recommender's point of view, because there might be someone in the audience who might be interested. Or I think so. So imagine, I don't know how the backend of Elsevier works, but I imagine it's of Elsevier recommendations works. But I suppose it's something like this. It's you have some user profile and you analyze the user profile and you identify some set of articles that are closest to the research interests which you identify in this profile. But I mean, I could assume that there are hundreds of articles that you could designate as those close to a user's interests. Now, within those set of articles that you designate to be interesting to a user, you want to recommend only 2 or 3, a handful of articles to the user. So you want to do so, you want to sample that set of articles in a way that is, well, maximally diverse, that is the most spread out, that covers the most ground. You want to sample it in such a way that you don't give them two articles, you don't suggest two articles that are really quite similar to each other. So this is some area that we want to put some thought behind. And another sort of thing that we're interested in getting, and turns out getting this data signed up to a university contract is slightly non-trivial thing, is to look at how funding distribution, how if I'm like, let's say the Wellcome Trust, and I want to distribute funds over topics that I'm interested in, how do we do so in a maximally diverse way? And that is a sort of control, that is a control we could use to compare real world distributions. And if, let's say, we compute the maximally diverse way of spreading distribution across these topics, and the real world distribution deviates from that, that shows a certain special interest of this funder in a certain area. And we could sort of play around with this concept and get some intuition about the users, the funder's priorities. And finally, from a mathematical point of view, actually computing these things is quite tricky. And we say that this maximal diversity is the result of optimizing a diversity index. Well, so these optimization problems are not always convex, which means, well, you could read convex optimization as easy optimization problems, and those are not convex are hard ones. So these are not always easy problems. And we want to look at ways of trying to take advantage of the particular properties of the system to get quick ways of computing diversity. And I'll stop here and end on this slide. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask us now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Andrew, are you still here? And do you want to look at the questions or raise some first questions? I know I have one as well.
You bet I'm right here. So I've got questions of my own, of course, but I'm happy to go to the audience first rather than me butt in on my own students' time. So is anyone else from the audience got something to pick Ambrose's brain on? Sonia, thanks for replying privately to me on the call out to whether we're using this idea in recommender systems. I'll get back to you on that. Thank you. Good. Peter, thank you very much. How do you turn an article into the diversity value, Ambrose? How exactly does that translate from what data are we using to create the diversity value? I think, Peter Arbuthnot, that's your question.
So thanks, Peter. So this goes back to, I'll go back to the first slide. Oops. So at the heart is of this discussion is this recipe. So, because when we compute this diversity, we do so by assigning weight to each article. So in a sense, this weight is how diverse this article is in relation to articles in the same collection. And for that simple example, we just use the keyword sort of Jacquard index.
Okay, so look, sorry to jump in. Just jump back. So you're using keywords for articles in order to get a standard, and then the keywords on the next article would be matched to that set of keywords, and then you get a diversity between two articles.
Yeah, so this is how we compute a similarity. We sort of look at the overlaps in the index keywords, and we only choose index keywords in this because that's sort of well controlled, and you don't get wild keywords appearing. So we look at the overlap in the index keywords and divide by the union of the two sets of keywords used by both articles.
Okay, and so that's going to be slightly complex because keywords, there's 10 of them per article or something. If you were to expand that to say the full abstract, and again, if you expanded that to say full text, you'd end up with a rather complex but much more accurate, perhaps, measure of what this article was.
Yeah, so no, I did so with previous I did some previous work on kind of the thing I presented at the last talk, which was trying to model topic trends, and that I use very a far more sophisticated sort of topic model, so latency relation allocation, not state of the art, but to compute topic generalities, and that includes data and there we use data from the abstracts. And here, I mean, this is intended as a kind of proof of concept, and we just use the simplest thing that we could compute. And of course, we could compute topic models, do topic modeling on abstracts and compute similarities in that space. So it'll be interesting. Sorry?
Perfect answer. Thanks very much. I now understand.
Ambrose, we've got 8 more minutes left, and I'm just going to stack up these questions for you because they're coming in thick and fast like planes at Heathrow. So we've got this very good question. In fact, it's from you, Noel, thank you. Could this model of distinctiveness be used to predict the impact of an article? And impact, let's consider broadly. We could talk about usage, we could talk about citation, various other different ways of understanding the real-world impact of an article. Going back to your scatter plots, I think you showed it most clearly there. Those dots, the articles represented in the top right corner of those. Can we say, if we overlay other ways of looking at the downstream impact of these articles, is the impact all clustered up in the top right there?
Yeah, so I think that's a great point. Thanks, Noel. And certainly a next step to extend the study is to look at how these let's say citations and the various existing ways of assessing impact correlate with how distinct an article is from the main bulk of research. And of course, we have to refine how we compute similarities in this case. I think if you talk to data science, and they would say plug this thing in the machine learning model and use it to sort of use this as a feature vector to predict impact. Mm-hmm. But that's certainly something I have floating at the back of my mind.
I think we could look at that, Ambrose. High local and global weight with reference to downstream usage or citation impact. Do we have the makings of an early predictor of downstream impact, which may take months or years to detect, when we have all the data we need in the keywords available at the point of publication, and in fact in the submission sometimes months before that? So let's take that one offline. I've got another one for you. This one is from Krishnan Mani. Thank you very much. Do the inflection points, go one slide back up for us, Ambrose. Do the inflection points on the graphs here, what do they represent? What's the significance of the shift down in the red line and the shift up in the blue in your mind, Ambrose?
So can I just confirm that this is the graph that you're interested in?
I think so, but Krishnan, feel free to unmute and go ahead and let us know. Yes, this is the graph. Yeah.
Let's see. So
so we're seeing A plus really drops. I spotted this myself. 2014 to 2015, we get a massive decrease in the A plus across the whole set. And then we see, obviously, the number of articles increase at exactly the same moment. How do you interpret this? Is this a crowding in of Me Too, same again kind of research flooding into the journal? How do you interpret it?
Well, perhaps. I mean, I haven't sort of dug into the data, but from this graph, I mean, it's already saying that something interesting is happening between 2014 and 2015. We see a massive increase from around close to 100-ish in 2014 to almost 200 in the number of articles. So, however, the effective number of articles in 2014 is dropping. And bear in mind, this really depends on how we compute the similarity. And since it's using keywords, it is possible that people are sort of agreeing on what sort of keywords that you should adopt to describe something. Or maybe, because I really haven't looked into the particulars, I don't really know this field myself, where this journal describes. But I think this is an indicator in some sense. And if we, let's say, compute similarities on abstracts using some more sophisticated topic modeling, or you look at citation data to compute this, it would be interesting to see whether we observe the same drop. And as an aside, I think this diversity thing, so which crunches the similarity and gives you an effective size, is also a good way of comparing two different ways of measuring similarity. So if two different ways of measuring similarity give you very different sizes, then that suggests that you need to look at what makes them different, and that means that you can't use the two to give consistent answers. But I think this drop is significant. This inflection point is significant. So I can't comment on further.
So I think we can find the person who can. Our colleague Josh Bayliss in the journal's publishing unit, who's responsible for this journal. I'm not sure he's seen this yet. I think we're going to send it to him and ask for his expert view on that. Thanks. So I've got one more here, and Paola Barr, you sent this to me privately. I hope you don't mind me reading this one out for everyone's benefit. But she makes a very interesting point that two independent articles which may be about the same topic and therefore would cluster very highly on the similarity measure that we're talking about here may actually reach opposite conclusions. Their keywords may be very similar. They may appear to be countable almost as duplicates, but they have very, very different outcomes to the reader as they understand and interpret that work. How can we deal with this in the model? Can we deal this? Can we know and understand this through these mathematics you presented?
So again, this all comes down to how we compute similarity. If we have good similarities, meaningful similarities between articles, then we get new meaning out of this computation. And I think I don't need to tell you how many people you employ to actually do these things. Dan London in data science team. And I mean, I don't, in response to sort of, can we deduce opposite, two articles saying the same thing, but using opposite conclusions? I think that's a very high level thing for machine learning model to tease out. And I'll be very interested if people down in London can do that, because that's fantastic.
Very good. We will find that out. So I think, Noelle, I guess we need to wrap it there. I think we've hit time.
We do. We've hit time. Thank you very much, Ambrose. Thank you, Andrew, for hosting. Thanks to everybody for turning up, especially when these are unusual times, but it's been a delight to have you here, especially for a second time, Ambrose. So it was nice to hear how things have moved on, and we'll certainly look forward to hearing more about what you're doing. We are hitting the summer break of our series. We usually have about 2 a month if you go to the Oxford one and the Appold Street one. I know my colleagues in the Research Collaboration Unit are starting up a series in the US, so we may have some over the summer, but for the most part, we'll be reconvening in September. So do let me know if you want to receive invitations to those. But just to wind things up, thank you very much. This was a real treat to have this, and we will share the recording for our other colleagues in other time zones. And with that, I'll close the meeting. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Noelle. Thank you, Ambrose. Thank you, everyone.